Welcome everybody, and hopefully we'll be joined by a few more. I know that some of our colleagues from BIT, the Business Information Technology Department, and the Computer Science Department said that they were going to join after they finished a meeting. And so I appreciate those of you who have come on, and we, as always, try and keep this relatively small and intimate, and then we post the video afterwards so that those who couldn't be here are able to attend and participate and learn from the intellectual that we bring in to really learn from them. And today we're incredibly privileged to have Dr. William Akoto, a graduate of the University of South Carolina. I won't hold that against him since I'm a graduate of the University of Georgia, and we don't really like the Shamecocks all that much. But he also did a postdoc at the University of Denver, a fantastic program out there. And now he's a new assistant professor at Fordham University in New York City. And so we're incredibly privileged to have him. He has a wonderful paper that he's going to talk a little bit about today, but I'm going to turn it over to him briefly to let him introduce himself a little bit more thoroughly and to hopefully give us an idea of what his current research is, and then we'll dive into some questions. And then at about the 30-minute mark, we will transition over into a discussion and answer period. So I'm looking at Casey and Home and others who are on the call to really ask those questions, to really make sure that they can get some good questions out. Then at the very end, we're going to finish up with a couple of final questions that we try and use to motivate undergraduates and graduate students who are looking to get into the field. So Dr. Akoto, I'm going to turn it over to you right now. Do you have any thoughts or additional things that you want to talk about your own bio or how you got to where you are?
Well, I mean, yeah, that could be a good start, I suppose. But first, let me say thank you, Aaron, for having me on. It is my absolute pleasure to sort of join you here. As you said, I have been all over the place, a little bit. I am originally from Ghana, but I did my undergraduate studies at the Nelson Mandela University in South Africa. I did my undergrad in computer science. So I mean, I think that's where my interest in cyber conflict comes in from. But the sort of throughout my undergrad, sort of somewhere along the way, I really developed a keen interest in economics. And so after my undergrad, I did a master's degree in economics. And then after that, I sort of worked a bit as an economics lecturer at the Nelson Mandela University in South Africa. And then sort of while I was doing that, I became really interested in military coups, especially sort of why the military sort of would feel the need to intervene. And so for my PhD, I decided to do a political science sort of focused PhD. And so I sort of wrote my dissertation on the link between coups and international trade. And so that's basically what my current research is on. I mainly focus on issues at the intersection of international trade, military coups, and cyber conflict. So that's sort of my long journey to where I am now. As you say, presently I'm an assistant professor here at Fordham University in New York. So that's sort of just a brief bio.
Fantastic. Yeah. So, well, this whole lecture series is called the Joan Clark Technology Topics in Transatlantic Topics in Technology series. And the reason that we particularly wanted you to speak was because of this paper that you just had come out in the Journal of Peace Research on international trade and cyber conflict. Can you give us a brief overview of your argument and the significance of your findings?
Yes, the latest paper really sort of examines the relations between international trade and state-sponsored cyber espionage. And really sort of the idea for this, and mainly sort of I focus on the link between trade and cyber espionage, because I think there are sort of significant linkages there. So for instance, successful cyber espionage could yield valuable trade secrets that could end up boosting the domestic production and could spur economic growth. It also enables states to maybe sort of produce more advanced goods, and it could boost the profitability of sort of domestic firms who actually end up with the pilfered information. And so in this way, state-sponsored cyber espionage can even sort of act as a sort of strategic trade policy, right? In the sense of sort of shifting profits away from foreign firms to domestic firms. But on the other hand, as well, state-sponsored cyber espionage operations that sort of come to light, that could have devastating effects as well. It could actually sour relations between the trade partners. It can increase the probability that these states will get into confrontations with each other. It could result in punitive sanctions. And obviously, we all know that sanctions can have sort of very negative knock-on effects that can end up retarding economic growth. And so in that sense, I think that the sort of relationship between trade and cyber espionage is an important one. And so in my paper, I sort of make the argument that the drive to acquire proprietary information is an important motive for state-sponsored cyber espionage. And so I make the case in the paper that sort of states that tend to lack such proprietary information and sort of other trade secrets. I call this the information deficit, right? States that have this information deficit will, and if that is if they can sort of stage cyber operations to acquire this information, that they will do so. And I also argue in the paper that sort of trade relations between states, especially those that tend to be sort of heavily inter-industry, can be used as an indicator of the sort of information the deficit that a state sort of has. And so we can sort of, in essence, use a state's trade, the composition of a state's trade as a proxy for sort of the information, the deficit that it has in relation to its trade partners or other rival states. And so I sort of test this argument that high inter-industry traders will tend to be sort of more likely to stage state-sponsored cyber espionage operations. Of course, this being conditional on them having the necessary capacity and capabilities to be able to actually stage such operations, and then to use that pilfered information. So in order to do this, I combine data on trade with data on cyber espionage from the cyber incidents data set that was compiled by Manners, Valeriano, and Jensen. And I find some support for my propositions in there. So it sort of overall, I would say that this sort of kind of work is important because it sort of reinforces for us the importance of economic incentives as a driver of state-sponsored cyber operations. And then in so doing, it helps sort of broadens the scope of the sort of known drivers of sort of state-sponsored cyber operation.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, I think I agree. I thought it was really interesting. And one of the things that I found interesting was this dynamic between inter-industry and intra-industry trade. Yeah. And correct me if I'm wrong, but you're talking about these imbalances between states in certain markets, or whether they trade relatively equivalent goods, or whether they're trading completely different types of goods, and then you use a variety of different measures.
Yeah.
And you say that, you know, attacks. You indicate that high levels of inter-industry trade increases the probability of cyber espionage attacks. So with this knowledge, what can or possibly should developed states with high levels of inter-industry trade with rivals do to disincentivize adversaries from engaging in espionage? And by that I mean, should they be focused on developing bilateral agreements to try and offset trade imbalances? What other types of activities from an economics perspective can we do to minimize these types of challenges?
Well, you know, the fact is, it is easy to stage cyber attacks. So that is the easy part. Disincentivizing or deterring cyber attacks, that is hard, right? So I'm not so sure, and I don't know if there is much that states can sort of effectively do to disincentivize attacks. But I mean, there are a couple of things that they can try, right? So say, for instance, they can try to maybe increase the barriers to success, right? For instance, by requiring multiple passwords, multiple factor authentications, using strong firewalls, installing sort of the latest anti-malware, antivirus software, and so on. The idea here would be to sort of make it hard, right? To raise that barrier of success, so that hacker would sort of it would be so hard for them to actually achieve success that they decide that it is not worth the effort to try. This is often referred to as deterrence by denial, right? Of course, if you have a very determined, very skilled hacker who is exploiting some zero-day vulnerability in that sense, there isn't much that will sort of hold back such a determined hacker. Another thing states could try to do would be, say, maybe sort of make it clear what the consequences would be, sort of state sponsored cyber espionage that sort of comes to light. In that sense, this could include sort of laying out things such as sanctions, indictments, potential arrests, or even imprisonment of the responsible parties, right? Again, of course, even this approach has several issues with it. One of them being that in the cyber realm, it is not always clear who exactly is attacking you or even where the attack is coming from. And even if it were clear, you can never be sure exactly who the hackers are, because they can spoof their locations, they can frame it so that the attack appears to come from somewhere else, and so forth. And if you're not sure who exactly to hold responsible for the attack, you can't act, right? The other issue is that espionage is sort of something that most states engage in anyway, right? And so in that sense, it is regarded in some circles as just normal, interstate activity. And so this, again, then makes it hard to sort of take any concrete action against cyber espionage. And it could, again, potentially explain why we see so much restraint, right, on the part of states when it comes to sort of using their cyber capabilities. Also, one other issue is that although the government agencies and the military can sort of do a lot to secure their own computer networks and sort of infrastructure, a lot of the cyber infrastructure actually rests in the hands of private firms, corporations, individuals, etc. In fact, most trade secrets and other proprietary information is held by private firms, corporations, individuals, etc. And so in that sense, it is unclear sort of how much influence the state or government can really have in enforcing cyber security on such private firms. So sort of all of this is to say that ultimately it really just sort of boils down to the decision that the individual hacker decides to take. At the end of the day, that hacker has to decide whether it is worth the risk to sort of stage a cyber espionage operation or not. Or unfortunately, the sort of payoff from accessing trade secrets and other proprietary information, as I lay out in my paper, the payoff can be really high. And this can be a powerful draw. So in that sense, even the best there are deterrence efforts, be it technical, economic, or otherwise, will not make much difference if if the attacker feels that the effort to acquire this information and the potential consequences are worth it for them. So in that sense, there isn't much that can be done. I am sorry to be bleak, but
No.
you know that cyberspace is a very challenging domain for governments to police.
One of the things that I took from your article that I thought was really fascinating, that builds off of something that Joe Nye has written about, is that where entanglement is low, essentially where intra-industry trade is low, cyber espionage is high, and where inter-industry trade is high, cyber espionage is also conversely high. And so I wonder if one alternative might not also be not just to think beyond conventional models of deterrence, denial, and punishment, but also to think in this notion of linkages, essentially linking trade sectors or building those in the way. So the way Joe Nye formulates this is that you build these interwoven networks of individuals and businesses and corporations so that you're essentially moving them from, he doesn't say it in the way that you say it. He's actually is a lot less specific than yours. But I think that yours offers a lot of insights into how the mechanisms that Dr. Nye puts up might work to entangle actors, to get them beyond thinking about these things, to think about how the way in which they structure trade with other countries might induce other states or reduce their incentives. And so I was wondering if you had any thoughts to add to that. I don't know. Have you read Joe's paper by chance?
I have read a lot of papers by Joe. I'm sure I have read the one that you speaking of now. But yeah, and in that sense, I think he is right that, you know, if you can, because, you know, if the sort of main driver here or the main draw is that information the deficit that I sort of lay out. If that is the sort of main draw, and the analysis in my paper would suggest that that is the case, then sort of, you know, rightfully one way in which we can maybe address this issue would be to equalize, or at least try to reduce that nation a symmetry, and maybe we can use trade to do that. If we can sort of structure intra-industry trade in a way that doesn't stoke rivalry, but sort of rather encourages cooperation between industries across states, that might then sort of lessen the need for hackers to sort of climb destinely at trying to acquire information. So yes, in that sense, I agree that we could approach it in that way.
And I like the way you pulled together all these different economic theories. I mean, you even touched on Ricardo in your paper and stuff. So I thought that was really cool. So one of the other things that I'm going to specifically bring up I have at least 3 students who are in the room. But I wanted to bring up the fact that your paper is one of only a handful of papers that I've ever come across that uses data to understand cyber conflict dynamics. And this is a pretty novel feature. And we We heard about this from Jackie Schneider, Dr. Schneider, a few weeks ago, that she said that we need to begin looking at data more. And your paper is obviously one of the first papers out this year that really does that. It really takes up this data mantle. Can you give us some insights into your process of identifying and utilizing data to study cyber interactions?
Yeah, no, I think it is critically important that we incorporate more data into our discussions about cyber and cyber conflict, right? In the sense that a lot of the existing literature on cyber conflict is sort of often based on their descriptive analysis, and sometimes you get like the sort of detailed case studies of specific cyber incidents. And I mean, this is great. There's nothing wrong with this approach. In fact, these studies have contributed sort of a great deal to our understanding of the dynamics of cyber conflict. But I also think that we can benefit greatly from analysis that incorporates sort of more cross-country data, like I do in my paper. The sort of challenge with the data in cyber conflict, at least so far, has been that a lot of cyber operations, right? Here we're talking about cyber attacks, intelligence operations, espionage operations, etc. A lot of them, in fact, almost all of them, are conducted in secret. They are not public, and at least certainly not while they are actively happening. And so it is hard for scholars who sort of want to study these activities to actually track them. And so more or less the only time that we hear about these state-sponsored cyber operations is really when either it leaks or it makes it into the news. This wouldn't be sort of much of a problem if sort of we could be sure that we are hearing all the cyber operations that have been sort of put into motion. The problem is that we know that the stuff we hear about in the news is only a subset of the operations that have actually been carried out. So this creates the selection biases and other problems, right, in terms of their data analysis. And I think this is sort of accounts for a large reason why we haven't seen a lot more of these quantitative-based studies of cyber conflict. Sort of in spite of these problems, however, I think that we should try sort of to do the best with the data that we do have available. Mm-hmm. And so in this regard, there are a lot of sort of useful data sets available that track cyber attacks, cyber breaches, and sort of other cyber operations that are sort of freely available online. One such useful data set is the one by Ryan Manes and Brandon Valeriano, as well as Benjamin Jensen, that sort of track state-sponsored cyber operations, and this is the data set that I use in my paper. So I think in that sense, we should definitely move more towards sort of the data-based analysis, but we can only do that if we are able to collect reliable data on state-sponsored cyber operations, and that has been a challenge so far. But I think sort of with time we will see more data sets appearing, and then sort of built on that, we will then sort of see more studies that sort of draw on this data.
Absolutely, yeah. I think that Ryan, Brandon, and Ben's work is great. And if any of the students or other faculty on the call would like access to that, they have a website, but I can also put you in touch with those three guys. Ryan's at Naval Postgraduate, and Ben and Brandon are both at the Marine Corps University in Quantico, Virginia. I also just wanted to, before we go on to question and answer, so I'm going to say this while I state the next thing, but if you have a question, please raise your hand, I'll see it, or please ask it in the chat. And so please feel free to ask that question, either raise your hand or ask it in the chat. If you want it to come out, you're welcome to ask it anonymously in the chat. I thought that your methods process in the paper was really fascinating, using logistic regressions and other things and you use mixed methods, and you really, I thought that the data presentation itself really hammered home the logic of what you were arguing. And I thought and so for particularly for my students who are paying attention, reading this paper and seeing how Dr. Akoto presents the data is really, really valuable and helpful, because it's a very elegant argument that's made, and then the data that gets presented is almost identical. It matches the argument, and then it really hits on this topic of non-monotonic relationships and other things within there. And so if you want to see how a very good paper is written, I would recommend that you look at this. And it's not incredibly long; it's 15 pages, so it's digestible within an hour or so, and it's very easy to consume and understand how he makes this really substantial argument, but that is that comes across in this way. So Tyler, Casey, Nahom, I'm going to lean to you if you guys have any questions, and if not, I'm going to turn to this first question that we have, which is. We have one question, hand raised. Okay, so Tyler, you go first. So Tyler, ask your question.
All right, thank you. So you had talked about some of the issues with kind of implementing sanctions and identifying like the party that's responsible for the attacks. And then we kind of talked about just introducing data. Do you think that we could start to use data to kind of identify the parties that are doing these attacks, like identifying the actors? I know we have an issue with like private firms are the ones that are responsible, like for holding the data. So then it's kind of difficult for governments to be clear and decisive to take action. Do you think we could link data and give the government data so that they can say, hey, China is the sponsor for this attack, and then we can then implement the sanctions and stuff from there?
Yeah. Well, thanks for that, Tyler. The issue of attribution is one that is tricky, and it is currently sort of a hotly debated area within cyber conflict, right? In the sense that sort of presently a lot of the attribution to cyber attacks is done by private cyber security firms, and they oftentimes don't really share what their process is, and so it is difficult to sort of independently verify whether the attribution is correct or not, even where it is done by government agencies. Again, they don't sort of share exactly what the process it is, or they will sort of just vaguely, allude to why they suspect that it is this actor versus the other one. And so in that sense, it is really hard for independent scholars such as myself to sort of really have faith in that attribution. The other side of the issue is if you have such sort of shaky attribution, and we have seen instances even where cyber attacks that were attributed to one actor, then later on we find, oh no, it might have been a different actor, or there are doubts that are sort of cast over the attribution, right? And in that sense, it makes it hard to pursue any retributive action afterwards, right? Such as sanctions and so forth. Although the US government has sort of in the last few years seems to sort of has increased the frequency with which it sort of makes these attributions. We are still no closer to actually sort of having full confidence in sort of the attribution of cyber attacks, and so in that sense, it makes it hard, right, to sort of hold the attackers to account.
Great question, great answer. And we have another question from Nahom. So Nahom, you want to ask your question?
Yeah, I was just curious if you've seen any anomalies where states with higher or more intra-industry trade still have like a high propensity for cyber espionage, like relatively to other states.
Yeah, I didn't see one like that. I mean, most of the states, when we can talk like Russia, Iran, so forth, who are sort of really active sponsors of state sort of interstate cyber attacks. Most of them also tend to have trade that is sort of mostly in industry. So that would sort of more align with the theory that I put forth in the paper. You also, what I find mostly is that states that are sort of heavily intra-industry trade, the US, UK, Canada, France, and so forth, they tend to not engage so much in sort of state sponsored cyber attacks, right? But that is not to say that these states don't engage in any of this at all. I'm sure that they do. I mean, we know that for instance, the US has sort of staged cyber operations against Russia, for instance. They have sort of staged against China. So they do engage in that, but we don't sort of know the full extent to which this happens. And that sort of goes back to the issue I highlighted earlier about sort of access to the data, right, on this cyber incidents. And so I didn't see any anomalies in the data that I looked at, but it certainly doesn't mean that intra-industry traders don't engage in state-sponsored cyber espionage.
Fantastic. We have another question that comes in from the chats here that I'm reading. It was a direct message to me, and the question is what do you think about the missing data in the data sets on cybersecurity in general? And is that a big problem to studying cyber conflict? Does it limit our ability to analyze? What is it? Is it a serious problem? How do we get around this problem? Are there ways to deal with missing data in cyber conflict analysis and studies?
Yeah, the issue of missing data is a big one, right? And for that reason, it is hard, even for scholars like me who would prefer to sort of do work that is heavily quantitative, to actually even get our work through. Because when there was just a paper that I submitted a few months back that was just rejected from the journal that I sent it to, precisely for this issue, that the reviewer said he or she wasn't sure how complete the data was, precisely because we sort of know that we are only, or we can only learn about a subset of the cyber operations that do take place, and even then we don't know whether the sort of the data that is missing is missing at random, or if there is sort of some systematic way in which we just don't have access to that data. So in that sense, yes, it is a huge problem. Whether there is a way around it or not, that remains to be seen. I'm sure there are creative statistical ways that maybe you could sort of get around it. The issue of missing the data is sort of certainly not new, and it is a common sort of feature in many fields as well. So there could be a way to statistically compensate for the missing data. But in order for you to sort of do that in a convincing way, you're going to have to know at least something about the nature of the missing data, and we just don't know enough about the data, and sort of its distributional properties in cyber to sort of try to do this with any sort of large degree of confidence. So yeah, no, it is a challenge.
So next, I think we're going to go to Dr. Song, who's going to ask a question. And so Dr. Song, you want to ask your question?
Hi, William. Thanks for a great presentation. And I'm a big fan of the paper. It was a really interesting read. So I can't help but not ask this question. So I'm also a political scientist. I have a PhD in political science, and I mostly use quantitative methods too. So I totally feel you about the challenges of studying cybersecurity with quantitative methods. And I was wondering if you could expand on this and sort of like a talk about, you know, what sort of like a challenges you faced when studying cybersecurity with a political science background, and what sort of like what in political science education helped and what hurt.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, I'm glad that you like the paper, and yeah, you are right that it is challenging to study cyber conflict from sort of a political science perspective. But you know, it also makes it really interesting, right? Because I think that state sponsored cyber attacks have a lot of political and geopolitical sort of dimensions to it, and a lot of people have actually already done work that sort of digs into a lot of these issues. And so in that sense, I don't think it is an impossible task. It is very doable, and I am glad that I can sort of contribute a small sort of part to it. In terms of sort of what helped from political science, I think a lot of theoretical frameworks could be sort of usefully adapted to study the dynamics of interstate cyber attacks. I mean, we have done a lot of work sort of trying to understand sort of interstate relations during the Cold War, for instance, right? We sort of know a lot about sort of how states navigate the balance of power between them, and how they navigate in the interstate political sort of power symmetries between them, and so there are a lot of sort of useful frameworks available that can be adapted to sort of shed light on interstate cyber conflict, and I look forward to sort of using more of the existing frameworks to sort of try to maybe sort of shed light on when and why states sort of choose to become aggressive in cyberspace.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for answering that. I'm going to turn to our last two questions. So we're almost out of time, and I don't want to keep you beyond the time that you promised us. So I'm going to ask them jointly. What do you think are the gaps that need to be studied in cyber conflict studies? So what gaps remain that you identify? And to that end, what books or articles do you recommend for someone just starting out in the field, a new graduate student, or perhaps an ABD who's looking to write a dissertation on the topic?
Yeah, I mean, I think those are two great questions. In terms of sort of the gaps that I see, sort of presently a significant portion of state-sponsored cyber attacks are sort of actually aimed at the private sector, right? We're talking sort of private firms, private corporations, and I think that the study of cyber conflict could benefit from sort of a deeper focus on the sort of firm level dynamics of state-sponsored cyber attacks. So for instance, we could sort of engage with questions around sort of which firms tend to be most targeted for cyber attacks. We could engage with sort of issues around which firms those are, and I say, for instance, firms that have very strong links with the government. Are those firms more likely to be targeted for cyber attacks, or are sort of firms that produce sort of highly advanced goods and services that uses a lot of proprietary information? Are they more likely to suffer cyber attacks? Why is this the case? You know, like issues like that. I think answering questions along those lines will sort of shed significant light on sort of what drives state-sponsored cyber operations, and may illuminate sort of new ways to deal with the problem. Another issue, another sort of area that I think could use some work is that, especially sort of in the last few years, we're seeing a lot of states outsourcing a significant proportion of their cyber operations to private hackers, right? With very loose affiliation to the state. We know almost nothing about these so-called cyber proxies or cyber mercenaries, right? So I think a lot of my future work on cyber conflict, for instance, is sort of focused on trying to examine the role that these cyber proxies face, how governments sort of form association with these groups, how these associations start, how they end, and what the sort of consequences are for international and interstate relations, right, in terms of the use of these sort of non-state actors as proxies for sort of state cyber operations. To sort of answer your second question, or at least the second part of your question, in terms of sort of the books and articles that I would recommend, there's a fantastic book on cyber mercenaries by Tim Maurer. The book is just called Cyber Mercenaries. If you just search for that online, it will show up. That's the book I am currently reading. I think it's a very useful book. It's a great starting point for anybody interested in sort of starting or sort of digging into cyber proxies. In terms of sort of cyber conflict in general, a good foundation sort of article or book, there are several of them. You can find many of them online, but I would say start with the works of sort of the leading thinkers in the field, right? That's always a good place to start. So look at works by, say, John Lindsay, Eric Gatsky, Brandon Valeriano, Brian Manas, Thomas Reid, Aaron Brantley, you know, several others. And then you can sort of go from there.
Well, thank you so much for taking time out of your day to come and spend an hour with us to share your research, to enlighten us. And I will get this video posted in the next couple of days and share it out. And hopefully we'll share it in some of our classes. I know that Dr. Song and I teach integrated security classes where we teach students from business, political science, and computer science. And so thank you very much. And we're definitely going to push these videos out to them and let them learn from your knowledge. And I know that I'm going to be assigning your paper in coming years. So all of my grad students and everybody should be ready for it. So thank you so much.
And thank you as well for having me on. If you ever want me to come back, I'm more than happy to. So.
Oh, we'll definitely keep that in mind and definitely look forward to hopefully having you back in a year or so. So very much. Thank you. And good luck with the new position at Fordham. So
thank you so much.
Take care.